first time I had Castella was after I saw the anime The Tatami Galaxy back in 2012, a show in which this Japanese cake features prominently. The main character makes a habit of guzzling this cake down in an unholy manner on a frequent basis, leading me to believe that the cake itself would be incredibly delicious. So when I found some at a Japanese grocery store in Sacramento a few years later, I bought some, unwrapped my slice, and took a bite. And holy cow, what a disappointment. The cake was only vaguely sweet, dry, crumbly, and wholly unsatisfying. As an American, the act of eating that cake only made me long for the decadence of a slice of German chocolate cake more than ever. And besides the dissatisfaction of eating, the cake left me perplexed. The constant pounding down of this cake is something of a motif in the Tatami Galaxy, and since trying the cake myself, I have been unable to shake some fundamental questions, even years later. How does the protagonist eat so much of this stupid cake, and why does he never seem to need, like, water to drink with it? Doesn't he get thirsty with all that dry cake? And why does he like it? It's like the most plain basic kind of cake ever. Is this torture? Is he torturing himself? I don't know! And that fact chills me to my bones. At least thrice a year I ponder on the improbability of this Castella gobbling behavior, and in fact, if we're outlining all the things I find disturbing about this Castella situation, I have to add that the very fact that I can't stop thinking about an anime that is culturally irrelevant, except to be the feather in the cap of some hardcore anime fan who can't get past his university years, is something I find disconcerting and also feels oddly like a self-burn. Seriously, I asked my friend Meilyne, who will feature later on in this video, if she even knew what the show was, and she said, no. Great. This bodes well. I'm so glad that I invested this much time into this video. In any case, relevant or not, I cannot let this go. So let's just give into the moment and see what we can find out. Come along with me as I take you through the dubious journey of investigating this incredibly C-tier Japanese cake in this overwhelmingly irrelevant show. I began my investigation with some general brainstorming. My memory of Castella is that it is rather plain, lightly sweet, but nothing to write home about. It's like the cake that they give you on lunch trays in America. It looks promising, but like most of the tray, it's ultimately disappointing. Could this be a reflection on the main character? I wondered. Like the cake, his personality is rather dry, and he's a bit of a lame stick in the mud. The premise is sound, but I was worried I was drawing too simple of a conclusion, so I decided to do some research into the cake itself. To start digging a little deeper, I texted my friend Rio, who happens to be Japanese, to see what the hype was about surrounding the cake. She told me that Castella is considered to be a staple Japanese cake that's not regarded as being too fancy, and it's pretty popular because of a Bunmeido Castella commercial that came out in the 60s. This sounded compelling, so I dug up the commercial, and what I discovered was a line of dancing puppet bears singing a jingle to the Can-Can tune about how Bunmeido Castella is the perfect 3 p.m. snack, while a Castella cake is tantalizingly cut open to let steam waft out. I'm sorry to say that the description is only half as wacky as the actual video. Yes, this is 60s Japanese advertising at its best. Anyway, this dessert became a household staple in the 60s, but before that it was somewhat more of an upper-class item introduced way back in the old days by Portuguese trading ships. To learn more about Castella, I flew to Nagasaki to go to one of Bunmeido's oldest Castella bakeries in Japan, and to research more about this illustrious cake. Alright you guys, so we have come to Nagasaki today to see for ourselves what the Castella cake is really all about. If you want to try Castella, you can pick it up at any grocery store across Japan, but Castella came into Japan from the Portuguese way before the Sankoku isolationist period. And so once the Portuguese brought Castella here to Nagasaki, the Japanese people really took the cake and made it into their own thing. So let's talk a little bit about the history that we've discovered. Portuguese brought over the ingredient that was really necessary for this cake, which is of course sugar. There's not really a natural source of sugar in Japan that is like similar to cane sugar, so this import was really important in the development of this wagashi, Castella. Wagashi is the Japanese name for like a traditional sweet, we could say. So they brought over sugar, and this cake is comprised of sugar, eggs, flour and water. It's a very simple cake, but one that is really, really special because the ingredients are so pared down. So the Portuguese brought this cake over, and then when the Sankoku period happened in Japan, which is the isolationist period when Japan shut down all the borders and all the ships and all the imports, this dessert really became its own Japanese specialty because the chefs here had to really take a recipe that they had kind of seen and tried from the Portuguese chefs and make it into their own really, really special thing. And so this dessert has really blossomed here in Nagasaki, where they first encountered it. And if you come here to the city, you can try all different kinds of Castella that are really, really tasty and yummy. Now, a fun fact about Castella is that there is some confusion as to where the name comes from. I think on the surface level, obviously, Castella sounds like Castile, the area kind of between Spain and Spain-Portuguese area, or Portugal area, where this dessert originated from. But there is also some speculation that Castella is so named because the cake itself looks like a castle. It's a big, sturdy kind of block of a cake, which doesn't sound very appealing, but it's got really strong fortifications, I guess we could say. And so it's kind of like a castle in and of itself. Of course, there is a legend that says that the name Castella came from the Portuguese chefs who, when they were cooking it, because this is a cake that's really, really simple, you have to beat it a lot. You've got to beat the egg whites a lot. And so they would yell, Castello, Castello, while they were beating, according to legend, and that's where the name came from. Whatever the case may be, what we're going to go ahead and do right now is find one of the best Castella shops in town and buy some of their Castella and give you guys a little review to see how it tastes. Let's go. Alright guys, so we went over to Bunmeido, which is one of the most famous and popular Castella shops in town. Now Castella, when it first came to Japan, was actually a really, really expensive specialty dessert item that you had to pay a lot of money for. So this was a dessert really restricted to the rich, the nobility, the very highfalutin folk of society. Now, of course, that's not the case. I went ahead and bought their osusume, their special, which is just one box of Castella cake for about $8 USD, not very expensive at all. And when you buy it, it comes in a box like this. And Castella is a very kind of sturdy cake, like it will travel really well and it will keep for a while. So if you open the box here, it comes in this plastic packaging, and you can see on the side some of the Castella cake. And since it's sealed and packed, it travels really well. You don't really have to worry about it going bad. So if you wanted to buy this as a souvenir, you definitely could. I'm just going to rip it open right now so that we can see what's going on in here. And if you crack this box open, you'll see that there are 5 slices of cake that have been individually wrapped and are ready to go. So let's just pull one of them out, and this is what it looks like. It's a really pretty cute cake, and if you notice, there's like brown, we call this caramelization. There's caramelization on the top and on the bottom, and that occurs naturally in the pan as it cooks. And it opens up really nicely. This is very Japanese. I love packaging everything to make it look really pretty. So if we take a look at this cake, we'll notice that it's super moist. Like this caramelization on the top is flaking off because of how kind of soft and gooey it is. And then on the bottom, we have a little layer of, this looks so good. This looks like rock sugar to give it a little bit of a crunch, which is kind of something that I think is unique to the area. You don't see this as much with Castella in Tokyo, for example. So let's go ahead and take a bite of it. I will say it feels like, take a look at this. Like if you just press your little finger in, it is so soft and fluffy and bounces back so beautifully. And I'm very excited to try this. It feels really moist. Oh, actually incredible. Because I'm not a super huge fan of Castella myself, I decided to bring in a food expert to help me figure out if the Bunmeido cake really lives up to its reputation. I thought the best way to do this would be to make some Castella myself and have my food expert try to see if she could tell the difference between the better version, mine, or the famous version, bunmeido. This is also a great time to show you how to make castella, so let's do that. The first thing you're going to do is start by giving your eggs a nice little bath to make sure they're nice and clean, and then you're going to set up your oven and make sure it's nice, hot, and ready to go. You need to pull down your pan and start greasing it, and I never do this usually, but I'm setting a good example for you today because it does actually make the process of baking a little bit easier. So I like to grease my pan with a little bit of butter and then line it with parchment paper. Why do I need to put butter in first, you may ask? Because that's what the internet told me to do, and I listen. Next, we're going to magically heat up some amazing honey and then put it into a cup of water. We're going to create a little bit of a syrup to go in the batter later, so stir that together and set it aside. Add in an indeterminate amount of flour to a bowl and whisk it. Whisk it very gently to aerate it and break up any clumps. Crack some eggs into a bowl and do it with one hand. If you have to do it with two, you're not cool enough. And then you're going to start beating the eggs. Beat them really, really good, and then add in some sugar. You want to make sure that your sugar is nice and sugary, not too salty, nothing like that. And then you're going to beat this egg mixture until you can't beat no more. In my case, I set the mixer down because I didn't want to hold it, and I just left it running for about 10 minutes. When the batter fell in ribbons like that, it was ready to go, and I started beating in the syrup that we made earlier, bit by bit, to incorporate a little bit of that honey flavor into the whole egg mixture. You're going to add in your whisked flour a little bit by little bit, mixing it in very gently as you do so. You don't want to beat any of the air out at this point, or you want to minimize how much air you beat out at this point. But when it looks all incorporated, you're going to pour it into your prepared pan. Look at that flow. Wow, like ribbons. Beautiful. Then you're going to bang it on the counter and bang it some more. Keep banging it. Yes. Yes. And put it on the pan. Now you're going to put it in the oven and let that get nice, toasty, and warm. It was at this point that I realized that my nails were quite ugly and bare, so I decided to paint them before moving back to making a syrup to anoint the top of my cake with. I'm adding just a little bit of honey to some water and stirring that together before setting it aside. Now that my cake is ready to go, I'm going to coat it while it's still hot with this honey syrup mixture, and then, again while it's still hot, tip it out onto some plastic wrap, peel off the paper. Look at it go. Isn't that satisfying? Ugh, gorgeous. And then wrap this completely in plastic wrap. Again, while it's still hot, you want to trap in all the steam and the moisture. That way, you know, it stays moist. Then you're going to put it in the fridge. And it is at this point that I realized that my thumb was still barren, so I decided to sit down and finish painting my nails totally. I decided that I needed to take my manicure somewhere awesome, so I decided to call up my friends and go to a baseball game. And so we went to the baseball game. We thought we were cheering for the Hanshin Tigers, but it turned out we were sitting on the side of the Swallows, which I didn't think would be a problem until they asked me to come and take my hat off because I was sitting on the wrong side. So I had to remove my hat, and it was at this point that I started to realize that this wasn't quite like American baseball. There's a lot of camaraderie, a lot of waving of umbrellas, a lot of cheers and dancing in a way that was most unusual for my American sensibilities. We also noticed people doubling up their umbrellas. Apparently this is a thing you do if you sit on the side of the Swallows, but after that happened, I saw them escort a man and his grandchild out of the stadium because they were wearing Hanshin Tigers gear. I was cheering for them inwardly, but outwardly I had to watch them go. Thankfully, the Swallows won the game, so I guess it's a good thing that I took off my hat. Anyway, let's get back to the video. So anyway, back to the taste testing. Today in the studio we have a very special guest, Gourmet Meilyne. You may know her as Gourmet May on Twitch or from the Trash Chase podcast, where she serves as the overlord of the Trash Chase boys. All that is well and good, but what makes her truly qualified to taste test is her impeccable sense for good, quality food. I don't know anyone else in Japan who is as dedicated to delicious food as Meilyne. Okay, Meilyne, so
yes.
You love Castella.
Yes, I love it.
Can you tell our wonderful audience, like, what should Castella look like? What should it smell like? What should it taste like to be, like, really good?
What should it look like? It should have, like, that brown top or brown bottom with, like, the paper that separates it, and at the bottom it should have, like, the the sugar crystals, like how I said off camera earlier, like Belgian waffles has the sugar pearls in there. Should have that, and yellow, very distinct yellow, and it's very yellow in Japan probably compared to other countries because of the yolk in Japan and smell. Yeah. It looks moist. It looks moist.
What do you like so much about Castella cake?
The chew when you bite into it.
Has like good bounciness.
Yes. And the scent, the smell of the syrup that they kind of drizzle over it is really nice. It just tastes good with really extra fragrant, what do you call it, teas?
Okay, so we're gonna test your Castella knowledge. Okay. I have underneath this bowl a 2 slices of Castella for you. One is a slice of Castella cake that I lovingly made with my own 2 hands to try to be as wonderful and amazing as the real deal from Nagasaki. The other is an actual slice of cake from the Bunmeido factory in Nagasaki. So I'm gonna open the lid and I would like you to, you can smell, you can taste, you can touch.
You can taste, you can touch.
You can feel, you can visualize yourself in a marriage with one of these.
Okay.
But I want you to tell me which one is the Bunmeido cake.
At what point?
At any point.
At any point?
Any point that you realize it.
Can I?
You can move. Yeah.
Wait, so I should point which one's the Nagasaki one?
Which one's the Nagasaki?
From looks wise, Nagasaki
Yeah.
would be, this one. So I also don't know. It's been a while.
It is. I think.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh, it is?
It is. You did so good. What tipped you off? What made you think right away?
The knife cut and the color.
Oh.
And the browning of the top and the bottom and yeah.
Yeah, so
from the top though, they look the same.
I got it the same from the top.
Oh, I don't know, temperature control and the yolk.
Yeah, this one's yellower, right?
Yes, and knife.
Yeah.
Knife really important.
I know.
For that.
I was cutting it and I was like, oh. There's like it's not quite as smooth as the professional.
And also, it just looks artificial.
This one?
Because when they make it like factory made, they have to put like preservatives
to make it look good.
So also when you probably bounce them later, they're gonna bounce differently, and then when you eat it, the chew's gonna be different. Depending on how many days you purchase it, the dryness of the crumb is going to be different as well. But anyways,
this is exactly the kind of reason why we're friends. I think that's so like cool and interesting thing to think about. Yeah, you totally got it. This is definitely the original one. It's funny, I like made a whole thing and I sliced it and immediately I was like, there's like line cuts here that you can kind of see, and I was like, oh, that's not good. But then the color itself, I was like, well, I think we know which one is the original one. Yeah. Do you want to try each slice and see if you can tell like a taste difference?
Where's that? Oh yeah, they're different. Interesting. And then I'm just gonna turn this on. Chewy. Has a chew that it always has. And then that preservative taste, like, for me, I can't eat konbini food as much anymore because I'm like, oh, I know this has the preservatives in there.
Your palate is too refined.
I used to no, but I used to like it, like love it. But then you just tell. It's not like I hate it. I just know.
Yeah.
I sound very, what is that? One of those annoying food people.
Nah.
I don't say it unless you ask.
You gotta
I don't like just sprout stuff out in front of like someone who doesn't like food.
That's okay. I understand where you're coming from.
Oh, but that is good.
Oh my gosh, what a compliment.
It is good. That's a good Castella. It's a good Castella.
Thank you.
What's that? Are you sitting at home alone by yourself crying because all you have is store-bought Castella cake? Never fear. I'm so excited to tell you all about a project I've been working on for quite a while. I wrote a cookbook. That's right. It's called Bake Anime, and it will help you to recreate the tasty desserts you've seen in your favorite anime series. The book is accessible, approachable, and most importantly, delicious. I mean, not the book itself, but the recipes inside the book. Some of my personal favorite recipes from the book include this very Castella cake recipe that you saw sampled in this video by gourmet Meilyne herself, And of course, if you're not super into Castella, there's many other things to choose from, including the Totoro-inspired cream puffs that I created, or the fire fruit flambe inspired by Howl's Moving Castle. We've got anime such as Naruto. Actually, do we have something for Naruto? I don't think we do. We've got anime such as Demon Slayer, Card Captor Sakura, Sailor Moon, and many more. If this book is of interest to you, it is on sale currently for pre-order. It will be published November 8th, and I can't wait to share it with you. Pre-order now on Amazon. I will include many links in the description box below. Please go and check it out if you are excited and interested and eager to fill yourself up with some delicious cake. Alright, back to the video.
Anyway, with my grudging appreciation for Castella now firmly in hand, I decided to sit down and rewatch the Tatami Galaxy to actually do some real investigative analysis into Castella in the show. There had to be some reason this cake was featured so heavily, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. Because this anime is seriously culturally irrelevant at the moment, allow me to introduce you to the show if you haven't seen it already. Originally a light novel written by Tomihiko Morini, Yojohan Shinwa Taikei, which literally translates to 4.5 Tatami Mythological Chronicles, was adapted into an anime known in English as The Tatami Galaxy in 2010. The anime adaptation was directed by the famous Masaki Yuasa, who has helmed a number of highly successful anime such as Kaiba, Ping Pong the Animation, Devilman Crybaby, and many more. The Tatami Galaxy was extremely well regarded in Japan, to the point that it won the grand prize in animation category at the 14th annual Japan Media Arts Festival, the first anime ever to win the award. It also featured on quite a few prominent top anime of the 2010s lists, even considered in one Forbes article to be in the top 5 anime of the decade, which is kind of weird. I don't know why Forbes, a magazine about business and finance, has an opinion on anime, but whatever. The Tatami Galaxy is a nice, tight 11-episode series that focuses on the protagonist, dubbed Watashi by some. This means I in Japanese. As we never actually learn his name, and he just refers to himself as Watashi. The story begins one evening in the stall of the elusive ramen shop called Neko Ramen behind Shimogamo Shrine, where our protagonist meets a man who calls himself the god of matrimony, otherwise named Higuchi. They get to talking, and Higuchi tells the protagonist, who is at this moment a third-year college student, that he is going to tie Akashi, a second-year engineering student, to someone in a romantic bond. The candidates? Our protagonist or his friend Ozu. This gets the protagonist thinking about how he met Ozu in the first place, and over the course of the episode, we see the protagonist get lost in his thoughts and memories of his past 2 years as a member of the tennis club on campus. As a member of this club, he quickly realized that he was socially inept, and so instead of making more friends, his predominant activity was working with his only friend, Ozu, to try to break up all of the couples in the club out of spite. He then recounts his failure to share his feelings with the girl he likes, Akashi, and blames it all on his friend Ozu for distracting him. As he's being tossed into the Kamo River for his mischief, he remarks that his idealistic views of college had been shattered, and that things might have been different if he just joined a different path when starting university. At this point, there are serious spoilers ahead, so click away if you want to watch the show for yourself. I would highly recommend it, as there is a ton to unpack about this show, and if I have to be haunted by it, then I don't see why you can't be haunted too. Just don't forget to come back and watch the rest of this video when you're done. So just before the first episode ends, Watashi is cast back in a whirlwind of time and energy, and when the next episode begins, he is starting university for the first time. But instead of joining the tennis club, he joins the movie circle in pursuit of a rose-colored college life, basically a college life that is perfect. And what about the food? There are a ton of recurring motifs and symbols in the show. I was actually surprised to find that food plays a bigger role than I remembered, and that Castella isn't the only food that pops up throughout the series. Also seen frequently is Neko Ramen, the signature dish of the ramen stand that Watashi frequents. Also hot pot, a dish that is typically eaten with many people and where food is cooked in a big pot, fished out and happily eaten, and a lot of alcohol, which I think is rather self-explanatory considering that this is an anime about a college student who is basically having an existential crisis. Furthermore, a lot of this food is tied into the characters that revolve in and around Watashi's life, so let's start by examining those characters and the foods that they are most commonly associated with. Let's start with the source of all of Watashi's Castella. Ozu is a friend who seems to be a thorn in the side of Watashi. He is depicted as a sneaky, creepy little man with onion-shaped hair, sharp teeth, and at times a lizard tongue. Since the show is narrated entirely from the voice of Watashi, it can only be inferred that we see him as he does, a sorry excuse for a human, and a friend whose only purpose is to get you in trouble. Ozu repeatedly tells him that they are tied together by the black thread of fate, which Watashi interprets to mean that he is destined to be dragged down lower and lower by Ozu. They frequently eat hot pot and drink together, and Ozu is usually the person that brings Watashi the infamous Castella to eat. Can you imagine if your bro came around and just gave you giant cakes all the time? I would make that person my best friend immediately, but actually if they gave me cake like Castella endlessly, we might have to have words. Wait a minute, there might be something to that. We first see Castella in episode 1. While there are many reasons for his gift of Castella over the following episodes, the first time we see this cake, Ozu brings a huge Castella to Watashi's apartment and cautions him by saying, "You can't get lonelier than eating a giant Castella by yourself." If my friend brought me a giant mediocre cake and suggested that it would be a bit embarrassing to eat it all myself, I too might stuff my face with the whole thing just to spite them. But Ozu's warning harkens to a broader theme of the show. Whether or not he was actually trying to be mean to Watashi, the significance of the warning is clear. Watashi shouldn't be eating this cake by himself, and that would mean that he's got no one to share it with if he does do that. I suppose even a mediocre cake is made better with company, and that's clearly the idea. This food is meant to be shared with someone. In opposition to this idea, Watashi delights in stuffing his face while sniffing at the idea of ever asking Akashi, his love interest, to join him. So as a whole, Castella is initially associated with a negative and ugly reaction to his friend's suggestion that Watashi might be a little lonely if he can't find someone to share this cake with. Let's put a pin in that and turn our attention to Akashi herself, who is probably the most important character in our examination of Castella in this anime, because she is most commonly associated with the food that is directly at odds with the cake, Neko ramen. That is, it is a recurring promise made by Watashi throughout the series that he will one day take her to Neko ramen to try a bowl of their delicious soup, and time again, he fails to actually fulfill this promise. Which is actually so annoying, because in each episode we see that she seems to be close to Watashi, close enough that they can sit on the steps of a shrine together, or a park bench, or some other secluded place and talk openly about their hobbies and their fears and their hopes, and she's not afraid to criticize him or anything. She's scared of moss, and when one lands on her face and scares the crap out of her, it's Watashi who helps her to recover. And whenever that happens, by the way, she reaches out for her mochigumon and uses them to relieve stress before telling Watashi that she lost one of the 5 mochigumon that are attached to her bag. He says he'll help her look for it, and she says she'd rather he keep his promise to take her to ramen. Clearly an invitation to go on a date, but he is too thick-headed to see her remark for what it is. It's very annoying. More importantly, his thick-headedness makes clear to the viewer that though Watashi has some far-off notion that Akashi is really cool, he doesn't realize she's being serious or that she would genuinely want to spend more time with him because she likes him. So at this point, Neko ramen is symbolic of his chance to form a connection with someone he cares about, sort of the opposite of what the Castella represents. But Watashi never seems to be able to actually bring her to the ramen shop despite having every opportunity to do so. A side note on ramen as well, it's traditionally a kind of a solo dining experience, but throughout the anime it's clear that Watashi delights in showing his favorite ramen shop to his friends, so that they can experience the joy of his favorite food as well. His eagerness to share this with others makes it clear that he isn't opposed to spending time with others, and in fact has no problem going against the grain and bringing friends with him to eat. Rather, he does not see himself worthy enough of spending quality time with Akashi, so he never follows through on his original promise to take her there. A few more notable characters and their associated foods. There's Higuchi, the self-proclaimed god of matrimony, who in all other episodes manifests as a wise 8th-year university student who resides in the same building as Watashi. He's called Sensei by Watashi and Ozu, and he's most often seen eating questionable hot pot items or stealing Watashi's own food. In addition to Higuchi, there's Hanuki, a dental hygienist, who in some episodes seems to be dating Higuchi, and sometimes she seems to be single. Watashi says that she lives off of ethyl alcohol and Castella, and in the show is generally portrayed as an older and sometimes wiser woman figure who is a rowdy drunk, and whom Watashi seems to begrudgingly like despite a few too many late nights out with her. Finally, and notably, there is Keiko, a woman who Watashi writes letters to as a part of the English circle he joined. In one letter, Keiko confesses she enjoyed a fried white fish dish she had in an Irish pub, to which Watashi says he'd like to go visit an Irish pub to see what the ambiance is like insert a joke about an Irish pub in Japan here. He then uses this as an opportunity to lie about his upbringing, which he claims is fancier than it really is. This is really a reflection on him. In response to Keiko's comment of her tasty meal, which he imagines she eats very delicately, he feels he must compensate by trying to come off as cultured himself. But in reality, anyone who is actually cultured knows how fake Irish pubs can be and how contrived they are to appear a certain way for travel-hungry people who want the experience of another culture without actually leaving their own country. This desire to be something he is not is exemplified in this elegant fried white fish dish, which comes up later on. So, with the characters and their food associations out of the way, let's look further at Castella. We have two characters associated with the dish, Ozu and Hanuki. We already looked at the premise of Castella as it's introduced in the first episode, and we see that Castella is symbolic of loneliness for Watashi, whether he wants to admit it or not. This idea is echoed in Hanuki, who Watashi says exists off of alcohol and this cake. She's someone who herself is lonely. In one episode, we see her talk about her on-again, off-again relationship with someone, presumably Higuchi, the 8th-year college student. She binge drinks with Watashi quite a few times and even tries to seduce him, to no success. Watashi can't bring himself to touch her in that way. Hanuki's life seems to resemble that loneliness that the Castella is a reminder of. She hangs out with a bunch of undergraduate students, despite her own status as a dental assistant and full-fledged adult. It's like as if she can't move on with her own life and leave behind the ways of the university life. She's always drinking to forget her problems, and despite Watashi's critical view of Hanuki, he spends a decent amount of time with her, engaging in some of these less than desirable evening endeavors. In a sense, she serves as a warning to Watashi about what he'll become if he doesn't try to leave behind the loneliness of Castella and alcohol and make some connections. Turning back to the cake, Ozu brings Castella to Watashi at various times throughout the show. Besides the first episode, he continues to bring him Castella, sometimes to apologize for disturbing his room, or as a congratulations for some event. Almost every time he does, Watashi thinks he's being condescended to by his friend, and eats the Castella in a jealous and bitter rage, sinking further into his own isolation by demonizing his friend and misinterpreting his intentions. At one point, after another club gone horribly wrong, Watashi had just escaped from a cult who's literally out for his blood. Akashi herself brings the Castella to Watashi since he won't open the door to anyone else. Just as Severe thinks that Watashi will finally have a happy ending, disaster strikes. Akashi mentions that Senpai Higuchi is sitting outside, and Watashi once again eats the Castella alone, while Higuchi advises him about the result of the trouble he got in with the cult. It's like a cult fronted by the softball team, and it's what he was involved in this time around. It's like clear that Watashi is so lost in his own feelings of self-pity that he embraces loneliness every time he binges Castella, blind to the opportunities around him. This becomes even clearer in the last few episodes when Watashi becomes trapped in his own room. After learning that Ozu secretly has had a girlfriend all along, the protagonist remarks that he'd have just been better off staying in his 4.5 tatami room the whole time instead of trying to find the perfect university life that he's been struggling for so long. What follows is a fever dream-esque few episodes that see the protagonist wasting away in his tiny apartment space. When he decides to leave, he finds it's impossible, and each attempt to exit just places him in a new version of his own room, where he can see all the parallel versions of himself reflected in his university student room. If at this point you're thinking to yourself, is this the galaxy of the title? I would like to congratulate you on being a good critical thinker. If you did not think that to yourself because you were so enraptured with my excellent essay, I would like to congratulate myself for doing a good job. In any case, yes, Watashi smashes and crashes his way through a galaxy of 4.5 tatami rooms. Seemingly infinite in each room, just like in each episode of the show, there are things that are subtly different. There is an amazing contrast here between the expansiveness of the galaxy he's trapped in compared to the tiny size of his room. A 4.5 tatami room is basically the smallest accommodation you can feasibly rent. A 4.5 tatami room would be approximately 3 by 2.5 meters, or roughly 80 square feet. It is at this point in the show that it becomes clear that each person's life choices can lead them down a road of infinite possibilities, but at the same time, it doesn't take much space in the world to paint a clear picture of who we are at our core. Of course, As he is trapped here and time seems to pass normally, he becomes increasingly concerned about his bodily needs, like eating. After briefly considering eating a moth for protein, and moths are another symbol of the show that we don't have time for, the protagonist searches his room from top to bottom and finds fried fish burgers, Castella, and whiskey. We haven't talked about fish burgers, so I'll add in an aside here. Remember Keiko from earlier? She confesses that she enjoys a delicate dish of fried white fish. The implication of her admission is that she is a beautiful, refined young lady who enjoys fresh, seasonal, and perfectly prepared food. In essence, she's the kind of woman that Watashi wants to date. The irony here is that it is later revealed that Akashi is the one who's behind Keiko. She started writing the letters as a prank to Ozu before Ozu took over completely. Perhaps in a bid to make himself into a man who could live up to this fictional woman, after this exchange, Watashi starts eating a similar but decidedly less glamorous version of the meal, fried fish burgers, which in the show looks suspiciously like sliced spam. I double-checked the translation of this with my friend Rio, but fish burger is the correct translation, even if they don't look how I'd expect them to look. In any case, even if it is spam, I think the intention is kind of the same. It's still kind of a sad meal to eat just by yourself, just like a piece of spam. In essence, this food is synonymous with Watashi's yearning for something that is out of reach and unrealistic, like his desire for his rose-colored life. As he consumes these foods trapped in his own tiny room, he is also symbolically trapped by his feelings of isolation and loneliness paired with his impossibly high standards for his own life. He spends so many days eating these foods that at one point we are shown a chart of the makeup of Watashi, and it depicts him as made up entirely of Castella and fish burgers, with only a small other part where his brain should be. His own dissatisfaction with his life weighs so heavily on him that at times he cries while eating his Castella cake. In one poignant scene, while trapped in his tatami room, he remarks that each version of the room he has passed through has its own distinct color, and that while none of them are rose-colored, the occupant in each room seem to be having fun. At one point, he even comes across a version of himself in a parallel tatami room, and realizes that there's no escape to the tatami rooms in sight, and that any small change he made to correct his course would change all the other hymns in existence. It is at this point that he sees another box of Castella and wishes he could have rice instead. For the average Japanese person, rice is a simple but crucial staple food. For many, a meal is not a meal without a bowl of rice. His desire for some rice is his first step out of the woods. He longs for a simple comfort food, anything to take him out of the prison of his own making. And then he remembers Neko Ramen. If Castella is Watashi's loneliness, Neko Ramen is his heaven. And this is, canonically true, because after he thinks about eating rice, he mentions that any night where he can eat a bowl of Neko Ramen is paradise. There are many points in the anime that add weight to this. Neko Ramen is a traveling food stall that pops up all over town. In order to find it, Watashi mentions to Akashi that he can just put his nose up and sniff it out in order to find his dinner for the night, which is a throwaway comment that becomes poignant when you realize that when it comes to food, it is the one dish that he feels comfortable relying on his instincts to eat. All he needs to do is sniff, and he can find his way back to his favorite ramen shop. In contrast, every time he eats Castella, he has to fight his instincts to share it with someone, resulting in his binge eating the entire thing. And when he does find the ramen shop, it is where he first meets Higuchi, the god of matrimony, and where he subsequently brings all the people in his life who are important to him, whether he wants to admit it or not. Hanuki eats with him, Ozu, Higuchi, and even Kaori the sex doll, who is a doll and therefore cannot eat, but nonetheless, he brings her. Have I mentioned Kaori the sex doll? Look, it's not important. Just know that he brings pretty much everyone here to experience the wonder of Neko Ramen, except for Akashi. It is so important to him that he dreams of it while stuck in the tatami room, and where he cries with loneliness and frustration when eating Castella, when he cries while eating Neko Ramen, it is out of happiness and appreciation for this food that makes him feel safe and comfortable, even when he's being chased by a mob who is out to kill him. So all things considered, Neko Ramen is a special food to Watashi, and the shop itself is something like the heart of the show. It is at this shop that he conducts important business and has meaningful conversations with others. It is where his beliefs are tested and where he considers the state of his life. And when he finally breaks out of his tatami room he finally grabs hold of the opportunity dangling in front of him in the form of one of the mochiguman, which hangs from his ceiling fan string. More on that later. We see everything set to rights. Watashi takes Akashi to Neko Ramen. It's implied that his relationship with her finally catches hold and takes off. As an aside, the ramen shop itself holds symbolic weight. Cats are representative in Japan of good luck and fortune, and when the show first begins and he meets the god of matrimony, the shop has set up behind Shimogomo Shrine. Shimogomo Shrine is one of the oldest Shinto shrines in Japan, and enshrined here are the founder of the city, Kamotake Tsunomi no Mikoto, and his daughter Tamayori Hime no Mikoto. According to legend, Tamayori Hime no Mikoto was washing in the Kamo River when she noticed an arrow floating in the water. She reached out, picked it up, and placed it on the riverbank. Before her very eyes, it turned into a beautiful and fearsome god. She fell in love, and they had a child together, and her child became a thunder god, known for having all the power of thunder when it impregnates the land with life. Thus, Tamayori Hime no Mikito's legacy is one of marriage and parenting. I decided to leave my apartment to go to Kyoto to see the shrine itself, and the journey was full of perils, but I finally made it. Big. This story of Tamayori Hime actually ties in nicely with one of those recurring moments in each episode. The protagonist frequently encounters a fortune teller who is hilariously described as being real due to the authentic aura she puts out. This fortune teller explains to our protagonist that he has an opportunity dangling in front of his eyes that he needs to grab onto. Watashi can't quite figure out what this is, but later in the episode, he always comes back to the charm that Akashi dropped. He found it and fixed it to the cord of his ceiling fan as a reminder to return it, but he never does. What the viewer understands and the protagonist can't seem to work out is that this is his golden opportunity to talk to Akashi and perhaps ask her on a date, but his own lack of courage stops him from doing so. Similar to Tamayori Hime, Watashi needs to just reach out and pluck up the charm and everything will fall into place and he'll be happily connected to the woman of his dreams. The only thing that gets in his way is himself. So when he finally throws his isolation and bitterness to the wind and grabs onto the Mochiguman to escape his tatami prison, it is a representation of him finally finding the courage to talk to Akashi seriously and strike the match between them. And when he takes her to Neko Ramen, it is an affirmation that his heart's desire has finally been achieved, and to some extent, his perfect life has been achieved. At its core, this is an anime about a young man casting off the idealizations of youth and realizing that life is messy and exciting and sad and fun all at once, and that there is no rose-colored life that really exists. The cake and ramen serve as symbols of Watashi's own inner turmoil as he struggles to come to terms with the realization that his life isn't what he thought it should be. This point is brought to a head when he talks with Higuchi, who becomes a recurring character in Watashi's life over the course of the series as they come in contact at various times due to Watashi's changing school affiliations. Higuchi tells Watashi that there is no such thing as a rose-colored life because life is made up of many different shades and colors. As such, life is all about living for those new splashes of color, and that a perfect, uniform life is impossible to achieve. This is reflected in Watashi's observation of the multicolored tatami rooms he treks through to find an exit, and when he finally breaks out and accepts his life for everything it is, the good and the bad and all that's in between, he's finally able to move forward. I guess also the takeaway is that too much cake is bad and eating ramen with someone that you like is good. And I would usually disagree with the cake bit, but if you're stuffing yourself with Castella, well, that might actually be bad. I mean, look, having a slice or two is fine. It's good. It's fun. Perfectly acceptable. But if you're gonna eat the whole cake by yourself, make it something good, like carrot cake or like a strawberry cake, you know? While I focused on the interplay between Castella and Neko Ramen here and how they help to reveal the dual nature of Watashi's thoughts, There's so much more to unpack, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on how everything fits together. I am pleased to say that I feel quite content in my understanding of Castella now, and I definitely have a better appreciation for Watashi's desire to constantly guzzle it down. I even learned to like it a bit better than I did before, so wins all around. But I have to say, I am now dying to eat a delicious bowl of ramen. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. And if you enjoy the analytical look at food and anime, pre-order my cookbook now on Amazon, which has anime recipes woven together with some light analysis, like a light version of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day. See you later. Bye.